All right, so we're going to pick up in Judges. Remember, just to refresh our memories about what we talked about last time. We talked about how the book of Judges, like all books of the Bible, but the Judges, you can see it, very clearly once you start looking. How the book of Judges is kind of a compilation of stories put together by an editor, or what they call in biblical scholarship a redactor, who kind of weaves these stories together, stories that are probably unrelated in their own right, but woven together into a narrative to tell a story about the life of the Israelites between the time of entering the land under Joshua's leadership and then the establishment of the monarchy under Saul and David. There was a time there where, according to this book, the Israelites were were led by tribal chieftains. It was really kind of the way the book of Judges, they're called judges, but not judges in the sense of making judicial decisions, really. They're more like tribal chieftains. And the way the book of Judges presents it, it was a time of chaos. As we talked about last time, the editor of the book of Judges clearly has a political agenda, and that is to endorse the establishment of a monarchy. And we looked last time how it says a number of times in the book of Judges, there was no king in Israel, everybody did as they pleased. That's a refrain that you see throughout the book of Judges. So the editor is pro-monarchy for sure, and is looking at this time in Israel's history as kind of a dark time. And the stories that we read, we read some of them last time about the Judges, are weird and dark and very satirical, as kind of a commentary on the society without a moment. We talked about also how the book presents a theology of history, kind of a viewpoint on why history unfolds the way that it does, at least for Israel. And we talked about a five-step cycle that repeats itself throughout the book of Judges. So did anybody remember? Right, one, sin, punishment.
Cry to God.
Yep, cry to God. Good.
Freedom.
Yeah, liberation.
Yeah, peace.
And peace. All right? Okay, this was the cycle. And we saw how it played out in the first several stories of the book. But Israel, with no chieftain leading them, sins, does what is not pleasing in the eyes of God. God punishes them by kind of turning them over to a foreign ruler who oppresses them. After a while, they can't take it anymore, and they cry out to God, please save us. God appoints a chieftain who leads them in battle against the enemy and delivers them, and then as a result, there's peace in the land for however long that chieftain or judge is alive. And then when the judge dies, the whole cycle repeats itself. That's the philosophy of theology of history in the book of Judges, right? And we saw how that played out with the early judges, and we read the story of Ehud, right? And we saw that although this template or this kind of ideological framework gives all the stories a sense that God is behind it and working the strings of history, and so the chieftain who takes leadership is an agent of God, and when you kind of come to it with that in mind, our inclination is to read the chieftain as a hero figure. But when we peel back the ideological framework, like the onion last time we saw, and you just have kind of the raw story of Ehud, you saw that he was a this very strange figure who was not heroic really in any way. Remember, he was a misfit kind of character who took it upon himself to ambush this king while the king was sitting on the toilet, and the names that are used are funny and ironic. There's a lot going on here that when you peel back the layer, you see kind of the satirical critique of Israel and its leadership underneath the veneer of this high kind of theology of history. All right, so we're going to pick up now in chapter 4, which is on page 520 if you have the brown book. So just kind of making our way through Judges. My plan today is to look at this story in chapter 4, bless you, which is the story of Deborah and Barak. And then we're going to move from there forward to chapter 13. We're going to chapter 16, section 13 through 16, where we're going to look at the story of Samson. Okay, but we'll see how much we can do. All right, so in chapter 4, the very beginning, the first 3 verses, again, we see the ideological overlay, right? The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, Ehud now being dead. And the Lord surrendered them to King Yavin of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor. His army commander was Sisera, whose base was Haroshet Goyim. The Israelites cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he had oppressed Israel ruthlessly for 20 years. So that's just the stock language. Remember, we saw it repeat itself again and again. In order to get to the core stories, if you think of the book of Judges as like a beaded necklace, right? You have all these little individual beads that are then strung together. And it's the string that gives unity to the beads. Without the string, they're just all over the place, having nothing to do with each other, right? The ideological overlay, the framework that the editor uses is the string that gives everything, ties it all together. Without the string, it's a story that kind of stands on its own. So the first 3 verses there is like, you pull that out, it's like taking away the string. We're going to look for the beat, because then you see it goes into Deborah. Deborah, wife of Lapidot, was a prophetess. The Hebrew is Udevorah Isha Nevi'ah. Okay, she was a prophetess, a woman of prophecy. Right? Anyone else do you know that's called that in the Bible? Yeah. There's only one other person in the Torah who is referred to that way. Miriam. Yeah, Miriam the prophetess. And she's referred to that way right at the splitting of the Red Sea, the Song of the Sea. So in terms of literary motifs, and we're going to see a lot of these in the stories that we're going to read today, that make us think of stuff in the Torah. Deborah is she's a woman in this book of Judges, which is all about men. Men are the primary figures here. And Deborah shows up, and she's called Isha Nevi'ah, a prophetess. And Miriam is the only other one called that way. It makes us think of Miriam. And Miriam is referred to that way specifically at the splitting of the sea, right before Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, in Exodus chapter 15. Well, right after chapter 4, just look forward in your book to chapter 5 of Judges. What do you see on the page? Another song. Judges chapter 5 is called Shirat Devorah, the Song of Deborah. And it's just like the Song of the Sea in terms of this extended poem about triumph, placed right after the narrative, just like Exodus chapter 15, which is the Song of the Sea, comes right after chapter 14, the story of the narrative, the splitting sea. Okay? So already the book of Judges is calling to mind Miriam and the Song of the Sea. We're supposed to think about Deborah kind of like we think about Miriam, I think. And in fact, when we read the Song of the Sea in the regular Torah reading, Parashat Bishalach, the Haftarah is Shirat Devorah. And that's the only time I think, I could be wrong about this, but at least off the top of my head, it's the only selection from the book of Judges that is read liturgically as a Haftarah. Remember, we talked last time about how we don't really know anything about Judges because we never read it. We don't read it in the services. Right? The only exception to that is we read Shirat Devorah as the Haftarah, Parashat Bishalach. Yeah.
Has there ever been any kind of delving into why it happened to be a woman this time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, lots and lots of stuff is written about Deborah. We're going to look at that now. We can offer our ideas. I mean, I don't know a ton about the from, I guess, I'm sure that in feminist scholarship there's a lot written about Deborah. I don't know a lot about it, but we are going to talk about her role here in the story now. Okay, so she was a prophetess. She led Israel at that time. The Hebrew is Shoftah et Yisrael. She judged Israel. She was one of the judges. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. I'm going to read the whole chapter, and then we'll go back and talk about it. She summoned Barak, son of Avinoam, of Kadesh and Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go, march up to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun. And I will draw Sisera, Javin's army commander, with his chariots and his troops, toward you up to the Wadi Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hands." But Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go." "Very well, I will go with you," she answered. "However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking, for then the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak then mustered Zebulun and Naphtali at Kadesh. 10,000 men marched up after him, and Deborah also went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had separated from the other Kenites, descendants of Hobab, father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched a tent at Elon Bezan-Nimim, which is near Kadesh. Sisera was informed that Barak, son of Avinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera ordered all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the troops he had to move from Haroshet Goyim to the Wadi Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Up, this is the day on which the Lord will deliver Sisera into your hands. The Lord is marching before you." Barak charged down Mount Tabor, followed by the 10,000 men. And the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and army into a panic before the onslaught of Barak. And just a note here, the imagery is very similar again to the story of the sea, right? The chariots chasing after them. But in this case it's reversed because Barak and the Lord are chasing the enemy. Sisera leaped from his chariot and fled on foot as Barak pursued the chariots and the soldiers as far as Haroshet Goyim. All of Sisera's soldiers fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, had fled on foot to the tent of Yael, wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was friendship between King Yavin of Hatzor and the family of Heber the Kenite. Yael came out to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord, come in here, do not be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please let me have some water, I'm thirsty." She opened a skin of milk and gave him some to drink, and she covered him again. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent. If anybody comes and asks you if there is anybody here, say no." Then Yael, wife of Heber, took a tent pin and grasped the mallet. When he was fast asleep from exhaustion, she approached him stealthily and drove the pin through his temple until it went down to the ground. Thus he died. Now Barak, in pursuit of Sisera, now Barak appeared in pursuit of Sisera. Yael went out to greet him and said, "Come, I will show you the man you are looking for." He went inside with her, and there Sisera was lying dead with a pin in his temple. And now we have the ideological language at the end. On that day God subdued King Yavin of Canaan before the Israelites. The hand of the Israelites bore harder and harder on King Yavin of Canaan until they destroyed King Yavin of Canaan. All right, so that's the story of Deborah. So let's go back through it and talk about what we see here. First, let's focus in on Deborah. What do we know about her? What is her role in this story? Sandy?
Well, what she starts out, what I find interesting is that the word is prophet, and it's the book of Judges.
Uh-huh.
And essentially what she does, it doesn't appear that she's doing any long-term prophecy, but rather giving advice, which indicates to me that she's got some knowledge of what warfare is like, what interpersonal relationships are like, what rulers are like, and so that her advice seems to be taken
Yeah.
by people. So
Okay.
she's got some street creds here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, since she's called a prophetess, I think we can assume that she's getting, the information she's relaying is because she's received it from God. That's what a prophet does, right? The prophet, and in fact, she's, the first thing that she says is to Barak, God has commanded you, go and do this, right? So she seems to be relaying a prophecy, just like Jeremiah or Ezekiel does. This is what the Lord said. Okay? So yeah, she definitely plays the role of a prophetess here. Right? What else about her?
Doesn't say that God spoke to her.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. That seems to be a gap, in the story. But given that we're told she's a prophet, and then what she actually does, because what she's doing is just relaying, like you said, advice. What is Deborah not doing in this story that we would expect and have come to expect after reading the stories of the judges? She's not leading the troops, right? She's not a warrior. I mean, she comes with him. And that's really significant, and we have to dive into what is the deal with her coming with him. But she is not herself a warrior. Now that raises questions for us, because all of the judges in this book are warriors. We read it with, Othniel, we read it with Ehud, whichever the other, the beginning that we read ones. They're all warriors, and they fight against the enemy and subdue them. Deborah's the only one in the book of Judges who is not a warrior. She's a prophetess, but she's called a judge. Okay, so something's going on here with Deborah. Why is she different? All right, what else do we see here about Deborah? Joan?
She's held in such high regard by this Barak that he won't go unless she goes with him.
Yeah, he won't go unless she goes, which is interesting, and we're going to explore that a little more too. Why is it? I mean, he's the warrior. She's not. She's the prophetess. He's the warrior, and yet she says, God says go into battle. He's like, I ain't going unless you go. Okay.
I look at him wanting her as she's the link between God and him and the people.
Okay.
And he
good.
wants her input, he wants her there for...
Yeah, she's the prophetess,
Yes.
and is kind of representing God.
And for advice
is able to convey the word of God. Okay, good. What else?
I think she strengthens his position by saying, you've got to do the deed, because otherwise everything's going to come to a woman, and that's totally unacceptable in the scheme of things, in the way life was.
Right. She says that.
Yeah.
When he says, come, I'm not going unless you go, and she says, okay, I'll go, but then you're not going to get glory because he'll be delivered into the hands of a woman. Now let's think about how it plays out in the story. What happens to Deborah in this story? She just disappears, right? Okay, now that's important too in terms of how the stories go in the book of Judges. Remember, Ehud, we read Ehud. he fights the battle, he sees the whole thing through. In stage 4, he effects the liberation and brings peace to the land. Deborah says, go fight, I'll come with you. When they go out to battle, she says, now's the time. And after that, we never hear from her again. She just disappears, right? Barak then kind of takes over as the primary character. He's the one fighting the war, except for how does it all come to pass in terms of the fate of Sisera? It's a woman who destroys him, right? Yael, who's not an Israelite. She's married to this Kenite guy. That's all we know about her. But she's not part of Barak's universe of, not from his people, not related, connected to Deborah in any way. She's a foreigner. She's the one who destroys Sisera. They're an ally of the Israelites, remember, because their connection to Moses. She's the one who kills Sisera. So Deborah was actually right in saying that if I go with you, Sisera will be delivered into the hands of a woman. The problem was it wasn't her. You thought that it was going to be to her. She was going to be victorious, but she's not. She disappears, and it's Yael who's victorious. Okay, so there's a lot of irony in the narrative here, which we should unpack. Like, what is the writer of the story telling us with this? Joe.
Another part of this too is that he was defeated by somebody who wasn't an Israelite, but somebody who was allied with him.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So usually the way the stories play out in Judges is that the warrior judge, chieftain, leads the troops in battle, the Israelites, and they win. They bring about their own liberation, or with God, is behind them. In this case, it's a non-Israelite woman who brings about their liberation. So, yeah, all right.
Well, this is true women's lib. Women are capable of more than you think they would be able to do. Going into battle, killing a guy.
I would say don't go into battle. That's
But
kind
she
of the
goes
point.
with them.
She goes with them, but she doesn't fight the battle. And she just says, go! And then she's gone.
She's the inspiration.
Okay. Well, so yeah, we have to unpack this.
And then the way Yael does it,
Yeah.
she doesn't give him some second-all or something. She drives a stake.
Yeah, right. No, Yael is crafty. I mean, she's the one who steps in. Yeah, she lures him into her tent. She gives him some, milkshake and whatever. And, he falls asleep, and then she does the deed. I mean, it seems like that the Israelite leaders can't get the job done here, right? It's left to this other woman, Yael, to do it.
And her name is Yael.
Well, Yael, but it's not with an ayin, so it's not like connected to God.
Oh.
God is El with an aleph. Her name is Yud Ayin Lamed.
No.
Okay? Yeah.
Maybe they used a woman to do the dirty deed and not the Israelites and have someone foreign do the dirty work in here.
In this particular story.
In
Yeah.
this particular story. So the onus is not on Israel doing a bad deed. It's on a woman and a foreign woman.
Yeah, but it's not a bad deed in the eyes of this storytelling.
It's warfare.
I mean, this is they killed
It's
she killed the
warfare.
enemy. I mean, and that's what all the other chieftains do, right? That's how they save Israel from the oppressor. So she did a good deed in the sense, it's violent, but she did a good deed in terms of saving them from the enemy. The only thing about this is that she herself is not an Israelite. The Israelite leaders who are charged by God here can't get the job done. That's significant. We're going to go back to that a little.
The name Yael.
Yeah.
I know a girl named Yael.
Yeah.
She's an Israeli.
Yeah.
Is that a Hebrew name?
Well, it becomes a Hebrew because it's in the Hebrew Bible. But I mean, it's from her. She's the Yael in the Bible. But in the Bible, she's not in it. She's a foreigner. And then that happens a lot. Like names that are given to non-Israelites in the Bible become Hebrew names because they're
And is there a Hebrew definition of the name?
I don't know. Probably so, but it's tied to her. Yeah, Ed.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe.
Um,
Okay, Irene?
There is a connection, though, between Yael, because she's a descendant of the father-in-law of Moses. So she feels some friendliness toward him, even though she was
Yeah,
friends
right.
with the other one,
Exactly.
which is why she could produce that deceit.
Yeah, so she's a
Yeah.
friend of the Israelites.
Yeah.
They have this connection, they're allies, but she herself isn't an
Is
Israelite.
that Yitro, Moses'
Yeah,
father-in-law?
her.
Is that Yitro?
Here's a wild take on it. Could Deborah have been she's a prophet, but could she be a messenger from God in the flesh to have Barak believe in what she's saying?
Yeah.
And when it was all over, she...
Yeah, she's a prophet. I mean, that's the role, that's what prophets do. You
That's
know,
what happened
when
to
you
her.
think about, that her job is to be the prophet. I think that's right. You know, that her job, even though it says she led Israel at the time she was the judge, she doesn't really do the job of the judge. The other figures in this book who are called judges do a certain job. That their job is to be the chieftain and the warrior. She doesn't do that job. She does the job of a prophet. So I think that's more what she is. Remember, if these stories are like the little beads that are strung together, when you start peeling it back, it seems like this is a story about a prophetess, Deborah, not a story about a judge. But the editor uses this story in the context of the book of Judges for whatever reason, because it probably serves his purposes. All of this is a critique of the Israelite leadership during the time period. Remember, we saw Ehud; he was kind of a buffoon, a weird guy. The others we're going to see when we read Samson, the same thing. That the editor of this book doesn't think highly of the judges. Okay, they're just telling their stories, but in a way that's very satirical and critical of them, of their leadership. So he seems to be using this story, which is probably a story known in the culture, like we have folk tales and stuff, using this story to make that broader point. I think the story is really more about Barak than it is about Deborah. She's she's the prophet. But you find that elsewhere in the Bible there are prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah, and when the David stories, you have Nathan is the prophet, who comes to the king and says, this is what God says, go out and do it. And their role is just to convey the word of God. They're not warriors. That's what she seems to be doing here. Barak is the warrior figure. And the story is really about him, I think, more so than anybody else, and his role. So we have to, in dissecting the story, we really have to focus on him and the ironies surrounding him. Okay, so one second, Joe. Let's dive into some of this. I want to focus now, for the moment, on Deborah's role. In addition to being the prophet, right, saying this is what God wants you to do, giving the advice. Her active role here is that she goes with Barak to battle, right? In fact, he says, "I'm only going to go if you go." Now, one possible reason for that, like we said, is because he wants her around because she's the prophet. But this idea of taking somebody or something with you in battle does happen lots of times in the Hebrew Bible. But it's not a prophet that the warriors take with them. It's something else. So what I want to focus on that for a moment. Turn back in your Bibles to Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter 10. It's on page 306. Page 306 in the brown, at the end of Numbers, chapter 10. Verse 33. Everybody find it? They marched from the mountain of the Lord a distance of 3 days. The ark of the covenant of the Lord traveled in front of them on that 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the Lord's cloud kept above them by day as they moved on from camp. When the ark was to set out, Moses would say, "Advance, O Lord. May your enemies be scattered, and may your foes flee before you." And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands." Okay? Here we see a connection in battle with what? The Ark of the Covenant. Okay? Flip to Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 3, page 460. Chapter 3. Early next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and marched to the Jordan. They did not cross immediately, but spent the night there. 3 days later, the officials went through the camp and charged the people as follows. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being borne by the Levitical priests, you shall move forward. Follow it and keep a distance of some 2,000 cubits from it, never coming any closer to it, so that you may know by what route to march, since it is a road you have not traveled before. And Joshua said to the people, "Purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will perform wonders in your midst." Then Joshua ordered the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and advance to the head of the people." And they took up the ark of the covenant and marched at the head of the people. The Lord said to Joshua, "This day, for the first time, I will exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they will know I will be with you, as I was with Moses. For your part, command the priests who carry the ark of the covenant as follows. When you reach the edge of the waters of the Jordan, make a halt in the Jordan." It goes on throughout the chapter. Again, when they go into battle here, the ark of the covenant accompanies them, right? And it is as though, and really not even as though, I think literally the way this is understanding it, that God is with them in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, it's not kind of stuff that we think about now, because our notions of God have changed over time. But in the Bible, God is really tangible, like an entity that, that in this case, God lived on Mount Sinai. God is in the Ark of the Covenant. And when they take the Ark with them into battle, they do it because God is with them. Okay? That's why in Numbers, when it says when the Ark would come out, they'd say, God's coming, all the enemies will scatter. And then when they win the battle, when they put the Ark away, God goes back into the Ark. Right? Okay? Turn to Joshua chapter 4. Let's look at, it's page 466 where I want to look. I'm sorry, this is Joshua chapter 6. Yeah, chapter 6. Page 466. The Battle of Jericho. Now Jericho was shut up tight because of the Israelites. No one could leave or enter. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I will deliver Jericho and her king and her warriors into your hands. Let all your troops march around the city and complete one circuit of the city. Do this 6 days with 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns preceding the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. And when a long blast is sounded on the horn, as soon as you hear that sound of the horn, all the people shall give a mighty shout. Thereupon the city wall will collapse, and the people shall advance, every man straight ahead." Joshua son of Nun summoned the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns precede the ark of the Lord." And he instructed the people, "Go forward, march around the city, with the vanguard marching in front of the ark of the Lord." And again, it describes the battle, right? Taking the ark with them. This is the key to victory in battle, according to many parts of the Torah. Now the question is, this is precisely the role that Deborah plays in this story, right? When Barak says, "I'm only going to battle if you come with me," if we're versed in these passages and others like them in the Torah, we hear resonance of, well, now I'm curious because usually what do the warriors want with them when they go into battle? They want the Ark of the Covenant with them, because that's how you win, because God's inside there and fights the battle for us, right? Or is the cheerleader or whatever on the side, making it all happen.
And then the number 7.
7, yeah. 7 is a trope, throughout the Bible. But we can, if we're confused as to why does Barak, this mighty hero, want Deborah to come with him in battle and say, I'm not going to fight a battle unless you come? Well, it makes a lot more sense if it were the Ark of the Covenant, right? Because then you get it. Now, but it's not there, right? Okay, so let's go back to our story in Judges 4.
What page? 520.
520. Okay, so let's look again at the passages where he's saying this. She says, go. She gives the prophecy, go to battle. That's the role of the prophet, which she plays very well, right? Then he says, Barak, in verse 8, Barak said to her, if you'll go with me, I'll go. If not, I will not go. That's where we would expect him to say, okay, I'll go if I have the Ark of the Covenant, but if not, I'm not going, because then I'm going to get crushed, right? But he says it to her, and she says, very well, I'll go with you. So then she goes. And again, she gives her advice, time to fight, right? And it said, let's see, back up in verse 10. Barak then mustered Zebulun and Naphtali and Kadesh, 10,000 men, marched up after him, and Deborah also went up with him. It would make total sense if it said, and the ark also went up with him, because that's how it always works in battle. But here we've got Deborah.
Where is the ark now?
I don't know.
You don't know. It's a mystery.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Right? Okay, so
Harrison Ford is.
what's that?
Harrison Ford is.
Yeah, right? The ark, when you know the biblical literature, and see, this is reading this stuff, the redactors of these texts this is complex literature. I mean, and they're drawing on cultural knowledge and so forth. When you read this and you know the Bible, you're like, whoa, something is totally wrong here. Where is the ark? Why do we have Deborah instead of the ark? Okay, that's like the big tension here in this story. So she went up, and then she says, go fight, and then she disappears. Okay, yeah, Steve.
Is there ever a physical description of the ark? Is it?
They build the ark in Exodus and so forth. It's
In
very
detail,
complex, very detailed description.
With the materials
Yeah.
used.
So here we have, look. So the question we're asking is, why is the ark so obviously missing from here? And when we ask that question, then we get some insight into the religious viewpoint of the editor. We've been talking about the political. He's for a monarchy. He's critiquing Israel's leaders. He also has a religious viewpoint, and this author clearly has a problem with the ark, right? Because he's leaving it out. Now, why? Why would he have a problem with the ark? Well, the ark, remember, is this thing where, according to the theology we read, God is like inside it. It's this notion of God where God lives in the ark and you carry God with you through the wilderness. That's not consistent with our view of God. It also seems to be problematic for the editor of Judges. What do you mean that God lives in the ark? I don't like that. That's weird. Or that's like the ark is like an icon. This author seems to doesn't like that theology. So he deliberately removes the ark from it. This is characteristic of what biblical scholars call the Deuteronomistic school of writers of the Bible. Remember, the Bible, according to critical scholarship, the Bible is not just written by one hand, despite what the classical tradition says that the Torah is revealed by God. Critical scholarship has put forth the idea that the Torah and the rest of the Bible are the work of many different authors. and who have competing objectives, competing ideologies and worldviews and theologies. And they're all kind of putting forth their ideas. And one thing that's great about the Hebrew Bible is that it's multivocal in that way. It's not consistent with itself in any way, shape, or form. There are lots of different viewpoints represented in the Bible. The Deuteronomistic school, authors of Deuteronomy and Judges is kind of classed in that same school, don't like this theology of the ark and God living in the box and so forth. Right? They don't like that. That's priestly, the priestly writers who wrote the Leviticus and the book of Numbers and so and much of Exodus. That's their school, but the Deuteronomists are opposed to that. So here you have, at least scholarship kind of suggests that you have a story, a Deuteronomistic writer who's advancing his ideology, and specifically by drawing on motifs from the Levitical writers with the battle and violating the reader's expectations, where you would expect the ark to be there. He's deliberately omitting it in order to make a point. Does that make sense? Terry?
Well, if we go with these 5 ways of things happening, during the time that they're sinning and the punishment and that, where was the ark during those times? Could it have been destroyed? Could it?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know. The ark is talked about a lot in the book of Joshua, and at one point it's captured by enemies, and then I think they get it back. But I don't know. I don't know exactly. You'd have to investigate. Where is it? But it's definitely missing from the book of Judges. Okay.
Does it show up later?
Not in the book of Judges. Is it in the rest of the Tanakh? I don't know. Not sure. Yeah.
To me, this is a more modern version that would appeal to us as 21st century people, because you don't want to put God in a little box. You want it all over.
Right. Yeah, that viewpoint is much more consistent with how we think of God. That God is bigger than the box and so forth. And that's when you go on into the construction of the temple in the book of Kings, where Solomon is building the temple, and there God says, like, no house can contain me. Again, that represents the view that God is bigger than that. But early, for the priests and so forth, that it's not so. That God can live in there. It's just these are changing ideas of God. All of this is happening here in the book of Judges. That's even apart from the ideology of history and the critique of leadership. Okay, but it's worth noting here as to why is Deborah here and what is her role? She's kind of a replacement for the ark. That seems to be Deborah's role. That's why she's not the central character. Barak is the central character. Because after she plays her role of saying, go to battle and coming up with him as her stand-in for the ark, she's gone. Okay? Now Barak comes to the fore. He goes out to battle. Now let's think about him. Who is he as a character? What is he like?
Well, it would appear that since he, first of all, says, I'm not going without you, that he doesn't have his own inner strength, but depends upon the strength of someone else, and he doesn't seem to call upon the strength of God to motivate him or to get him going, but rather on Deborah, who is the strong character. This may be about Barak.
Yeah.
But without Deborah, he'd still be sitting under some palm
For
tree
sure.
somewhere.
Yeah, he's not a strong figure.
Yeah.
I mean, he says, I'm not going.
Yeah.
Unless I've got, now, if it were the ark, you would kind of get it. But the way the editor is utilizing, A, by removing the ark, he's making the points we've been talking about. B, he's substituting with Deborah. So now, that has its own resonance. Barak, the mighty warrior, says, I'm not going unless the woman comes with me. He's not and especially in the biblical stories, that's not the sign of a big heroic man. He's weak, right?
It seems like he's a very human man. In other words, no matter who we are, I mean, we're not going to walk to the edge of a cliff and jump off without looking and seeing, having some kind of support system around him. So he sucks it up and says, okay, she must have given him some kind of an inner strength to allow him to become who he is.
Yeah, he draws courage from him, but look, he's got 10,000 men or whatever.
One-dimensional character.
No.
At all.
Yeah, but he seems to be not the bravest man in the world. He's got all these thousands of troops with him and everything. He's like, but I'm not going unless you go. Okay, now let's also think about how does it play out. Barak, he's got Deborah with him representing God, the stand-in for the ark. And he goes out and he's chasing the troops down, and he seems to be winning the battle. Then Sisera gets away, right? And then Yael lures him into the tent, right, and kills him. Now, Barak then comes, right, in verse 22. Barak appeared in pursuit of Sisera. Yael greeted him, said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're looking for." He went inside, and there he was dead. Now, what does Barak mean in Hebrew?
Blessing.
No. You had it.
Lightning.
Lightning.
Barak means lightning.
That's our
Okay, so that song, the Condescendish,
Yes.
Eli, Eli, and it's, I pray this, and then it's, Ha'ol v'hayam, Rishru shel hamayim, Barak hashamayim, like the flash of the heavens, the lightning. Okay, now here we've got great irony. Barak's name is lightning. And how does the story play out? How does it play out? What's the irony here?
He's not lightning.
He's not lightning. Why? Because he shows up late. The whole thing has happened. Yael kills the enemy, and then he's like, "I'm here!" Right? He's slow. You see that? He shows up after the whole thing is over, and he's like, "I'm here ready to fight the battle." And Yael is like,
Whatever.
right? So here's the big, scary warrior, General Lightning, who won't go into battle without, even though he's got 10,000 soldiers, without the woman to be with him. And he's so fast that he shows up late after another woman who's not even an Israelite, and in a particularistic literature, that's significant, who's not even an Israelite, does the job for him. Right? So this is a very strong critique of Barak and by extension of Israelite leadership during the time of the judges. This all fits with the editor's idea that we need a king because these guys are clowns that are leading us, right? That's the whole theme of this book. And you see how he accomplishes it by, taking us a bead that was out there, probably some kind of story about a prophetess and a warrior whose name was Lightning, and places it in the ideological framework, draws on the motifs of the Song of the Sea, and utilizes Deborah as a stand-in for the ark, and it's building all up. You're expecting that this is going to be a big, victory like the Song of the Sea, and Barak and Deborah, they're the heroes like Moses and Miriam, and then it just doesn't happen that way. She disappears, he shows up late, and by the way, it's a foreign woman who does for Israel what its own leaders couldn't do. All right? That's what this story is about. Yeah, Terry.
Yeah, I find it interesting that when they describe the men, they say who their father was, but when they describe the women, they say who their husband.
Yeah, right, because it's tribal. Yeah, in terms of the structures, when a woman marries into the tribe, if she's from tribe A and the husband is from tribe B and she marries tribe B, she becomes a part of tribe B. She's not a part of tribe A. Yeah, you take your husband's name.
If you choose to do so.
Right, yeah. All right.
In the song, on page 527, 28, through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she whined, "Why is this chariot so long in coming?"
Yeah. Well, the Song of Deborah is a whole different thing, which we're not going to go into. There's a lot of scholarship in the Song of Deborah and what its connection is to this story. It's too much to go into now, but I wanted us to read the story, and it is significant that the song is placed right after the narrative in chapter 4, just like in the Torah, the Song of the Sea is placed right after the narrative of the victory. Okay? All right, so let's see how we're doing on our time. Okay, good. Now let's flip forward in Judges to chapter 16.
Thank you.
553. All right, so now we're going to get in. We've got about 40 minutes to spend on the story of Samson. Okay, so before we read Samson, now, again, this isn't something that we ever read liturgically. You just know this because it's out there, probably to the extent that you do. What do you know about Samson? He's strong, right? What else do you know about him?
Long hair.
Long hair. Anything else?
He's got a weakness for women.
He's got a weakness for women.
Eileen, where is it?
Yeah, this is undoing. Anything else you know about Samson?
Well, he was seduced by a woman.
Okay, yeah.
By the same woman that he was.
Well, it's not, yeah, it's a lot of women. The story of Samson runs from chapter 13 through chapter 16 in Judges. We're going to start with 16 and then go back to 13. I'll explain why. So Samson, so you know about him. He's like the mythical figure. I mean, we just kind of know that he's strong. He's like the Jewish, Tarzan and Hercules. But we're going to read the story, some of the story of him, and see kind of what he's like. And remember, he's here in the book of Judges. He's also one of the Shoftim, but fit into the ideological framework. When you peel back that stuff, we just got a story of Samson, and we're going to learn about who he is. All right, so let's start in 16. Once Samson, now the ideological framework comes earlier. We'll see it in chapter 13, where he becomes a judge and all that. And remember, it's because of this stuff, the language, Israel was suffering, God appointed or they cried out, he's God sent Samson. That through that lens, we read the figures as heroic figures. But as we're seeing, whenever we peel that stuff back and just look about the story of them, they don't necessarily come off as the heroic figures, right? Okay. Once Samson went to, okay, so the first part of 16 is Samson sleeps with this hooker or whatever, and he's a womanizer, Samson. Okay, but I want to pick up on verse 4, because this is like the famous story, Samson and Delilah. All right, after that, he fell in love with a woman in the Wadi Sorek named Delilah. Now, Samson chapter 13 through 16, he's just going from one woman to the next. He's got a weakness for women, like you said. And so he's sleeping with a prostitute, he said this over here. Now he meets Delilah and falls in love with her. And again, she's a foreigner. The lords of the Philistines went up to her and said, "Coax him and find out what makes him so strong, and how we can overpower him, tie him up, and make him helpless. And we'll each give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, what makes you so strong? And how could you be tied up and made helpless?" Samson replied, "If I were to be tied with 7 fresh tendons that had not been dried, I should become as weak as an ordinary man." So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh tendons that had not been dried. She bound him with them, while an ambush was waiting in her room. Then she called out to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Whereat he pulled the tendons apart, as a strand of tow comes apart at the touch of fire. So the secret of his strength remained unknown. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Oh, you deceived me, you lied to me. Do tell me now how you can be tied up." He said, "If I were to be bound with new ropes that had never been used, I would become as weak as an ordinary man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, while an ambush was waiting in a room. And she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he tore them off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have been deceiving me all along. You have been lying to me. Tell me, how could you be tied up?" He answered, "If you weave 7 locks of my head into the web, into the web. And she pinned it with a peg and cried to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Awaking from his sleep, he pulled out the peg, the loom, and the web. Then she said, how can you say you love me when you don't confide in me? This makes 3 times that you've deceived me and haven't told me what makes you so strong. Finally, after she had nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was wearied to death, and he confided everything to her. He said to her, no razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God since I was in my mother's womb. If my hair were cut, my strength would leave me, and I should become as weak as an ordinary man. Sensing that he had confided everything to her, Delilah sent for the lords of the Philistines with this message, come up once more, for he has confided everything to me. And the lords of the Philistines came up and brought the money with them. She lulled him to sleep on her lap. Then she called in a man, and she had him cut off the 7 locks of his head. Thus she weakened him and made him helpless. His strength slipped away from him. She cried, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he awoke from his sleep, thinking he would break loose and shake himself free as he had the other times. For he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and shackled him in bronze fetters, and he became a mill slave in the prison. After his hair was cut off, it began to grow back. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon, and to make merry. They chanted, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy Samson. When the people saw him, they sang praises to their God, chanting, our God has delivered into our hands the enemy who devastated our land and who slew so many of us. As their spirits rose, they said, call Samson here and let him dance for us. Samson was fetched from the prison, and he danced for them. They put him between the pillars. And Samson said to the boy who was leading him by the hand, let go of me and let me feel the pillars that the temple rests upon, that I may lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and there were some 3,000 men and women on the roof watching Samson dance. Then Samson called to the Lord, O Lord God, please remember me, and give me strength just this once, O God, to take revenge on the Philistines, if only for one of my 2 eyes. He embraced the 2 middle pillars that the temple rested upon, one with his right arm and one with his left, and leaned against them. Samson cried, let me die with the Philistines. And he pulled with all his might. The temple came crashing down on the lords and all the people in it. Those who were slain by him as he died outnumbered those who had been slain by him when he lived. His brothers and all his father's household came down and carried him up and buried him in the tomb of his father Manoah between Zorah and Eshtaol. He had led Israel for 20 years. All right, so what do we learn about Samson in this story? He's kind of stupid. Why?
Because, I mean, after all he finally gave her the information, I mean.
Yeah, right. He doesn't clue in. I mean, clearly she's betraying him every time. And he just keeps going back, right? And then gives her the real information. And she goes, I mean, he's just an idiot. Okay, Joe?
But before that, he ruled for 16 years before this happened.
Yeah, he was a judge, but again, see, that's the ideological overlay, right? Placing him in the context of the necklace. But the bead, when you remove that stuff away, you have this guy who has a weakness for women. He falls for Delilah. She keeps going, she tells him like, tell me, and then she betrays him, and he just keeps going back, right? And finally, she does him in, but then he kills them all. All right, what else do we learn about him? Put himself, yeah.
The fact that he had on here, the fact that he was an Nazarite within his mother's womb, so
Yeah.
that gives us a background. The mother must have had some idea of why her child would never let it have his hair cut and all that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we get the thing that he's got superhuman strength. I mean, we learned that about in the other stories of Samson, which we just didn't read. He's like picking, pulling gates out of the ground. I mean, he's super strong. And we learn from this story that his superhuman strength is connected to his long hair. Right? Which the story then tells us when he gives all the information to Delilah, it's because he's a Nazarite. And Nazarites have long hair. Right? Now, in order to understand this, let's flip back to the book of Numbers, chapter 6. Numbers chapter 6, page 292. Page 292. Okay, so this is the passage in the Torah about the Nazarite. So Sandy, would you read it for us?
Sure. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazarite's vow to set himself apart for the Lord, he shall abstain from wine and other intoxicant. He shall not drink vinegar of wine or of any other intoxicant. Neither shall he drink anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor eat grapes fresh or dried. Throughout his term as Nazarite, he may not eat anything that is obtained from the grapevine, even seeds or skin. Throughout the term of his vow as a Nazarite, no razor shall touch his head. It shall remain consecrated until the completion of his term as Nazarite of the Lord, the hair of his head being left to grow untrimmed. Throughout the term that he has set apart for the Lord, he shall not go in where there is a dead person. Even if his father or mother or brother or sister should die, he must not defile himself.
For them.
Oh,
He must not defile himself for them.
since his hair.
Since
His
hair
hair
is set apart.
apart for his God is upon his head. Throughout his term as a Nazarite, he is consecrated to the Lord. If a person dies suddenly near him, defiling his consecrated hair, he shall shave his head on the day he becomes clean. He shall shave it on the seventh day.
All right, let's skip because it's these
Yeah.
ritual offerings. Then in verse 13, this is the ritual for the Nazarite. On the day that his term as Nazarite is completed, he shall be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting. He makes these offerings, and then it's over. Now, what did we learn about Samson and the fact of his being a Nazarite? What did that mean for him? He can't cut his hair, which is true of a Nazarite according to number 6. What else did we learn about him?
Nothing from a grape or wine or anything.
He can't drink, okay, right?
But
So he
nothing
does
from a
that?
grape of any kind.
Yeah, right, nothing, okay. But what else? What is essential to chapter 16 of Judges, which we read, about Samson? The fact of his long hair means that what?
Strong.
He's strong. Now, do we read anything in here about being strong? No. There's nothing here in number 6 that says that a Nazarite's long hair gives him superhuman strength. What is the point of the long hair in chapter 6 of Numbers?
He's set apart for the Lord.
Set apart for God, right? The Nazarite, according to the Torah, is somebody who is like a monk or a nun or something who follows certain rules in terms of personal conduct as a way of setting himself apart for service to God. There's nothing about making him superhuman in terms of strength. That's unique to the Samson story. Okay? But what is connected with Samson and the Nazarite is the fact of long hair. Okay? So we've got to keep that in mind now as we go back to chapter 13 of Judges. So go to, let's see, where is it? Judges 13, page 547. This is the beginning of the Samson story, and it's a story about Samson's origins, his birth. Okay? And here we have the ideological language. The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Okay, now we're set the context. There was a certain man from Zorah of the stock of Dan, whose name was Manoah. his wife was barren and had borne no children. An angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "You are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." Now, what does that sound like?
Sarah.
Well,
Sarah.
Jesus,
Sarah.
Abraham and Sarah, right? Where the men show up and give the message to Sarah, she's barren, that you're going to give birth to a son, Isaac. Hannah, it's the barren woman motif is all over the place in the Hebrew Bible. So here we see it again. It's reminding us of Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac who's born from them specifically. And of course, Rachel is also barren. And the barrenness is cured by God specifically. God intervenes to cause the woman to give birth. Okay? Verse 4. Now be careful not to drink wine or other intoxicant, or to eat anything unclean, for you are going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head, for the boy is to be a Nazirite to God from the womb on. He shall be the first to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Now, what do we see here? Having read Numbers chapter 6, what do we see here that causes us to ask questions?
Well, it's preordained. He's fated from being born to die to save Israel.
Okay, God has this plan for him. Yeah,
It
what
also
else?
sounds like his mother is not a Nazarite.
His mother's not a Nazarite. He's going to be a Nazarite. But who's making the vow here of abstention?
Mother.
The mother. Is that how a Nazarite works according to Numbers chapter 6? No. How does a Nazarite work? Somebody decides of their own volition, I want to be a Nazarite, I want to set myself apart for God like a monk or whatever, and makes the vow. I will be a Nazarite, I will not drink or eat anything from grapes, I will not cut my hair. But here, it's Samson's mother who is taking on those restrictions, because her son is going to be a Nazarite in the womb. Well, that's not how Nazarite works according to the Torah. So something is weird. Something is off here. Okay? Let's keep going. The woman went and told her husband, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very frightening. I did not ask him where he was from, nor did he tell me his name. He said to me, 'You are going to conceive and bear a son. Drink no wine or other intoxicants, and eat nothing unclean. For the boy is to be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death.'" Again, it's on her. Now we're going to see later with Samson, he doesn't cut his hair because he's a Nazarite, but it's the mother who's taking on the vows. Manoach pleaded with the Lord. "Oh, my Lord," he said, "please let the man of God that you sent come to us again, and let him instruct us how to act with the child that is to be born." God heeded Manoach's plea, and the angel of God came to the woman. Again, now notice how this is playing out. The angel first comes to the woman, the mother of Samson, who does not have a name here. She tells her husband, Manoach. He's like, "Whoa, my gosh," and prays, "God, send the guy again so that I can ask questions." And then who does the angel appear to? To her, again, not to Manoach, to her, right? She was sitting in the field, and her husband Manoach was not with her. Okay, he's not there again. He reminds me, anybody see Pulp Fiction? Okay, remember John Travolta's character in Pulp Fiction? There's something about him in the narrative of that story that's really funny, which is that whenever something big happens in the narrative, you know where he is? He's not there. Where is he? In the bathroom. He's in the bathroom. He's always in the bathroom, right? Okay, that's the thing. Throughout Pulp Fiction, whenever something big goes down, John Travolta is always in the bathroom. Well, Manoach is like that. Okay? Whenever the big thing happens, he's never there. Okay? So the angel shows up, and Manoach is not there. The woman ran in haste to tell her husband. She said to him, "The man who came to me before has just appeared to me." Manoah promptly followed his wife. He came to the man and asked him, "Are you the man who spoke to my wife?" "Yes," he answered. Then Manoah said, "May your words soon come true. What rules shall be observed for the boy?" The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "The woman must abstain from all the things against which I warned her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, or drink wine or other intoxicant, or eat anything unclean. She must observe all that I commanded her." Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Let us detain you and prepare a kid for you." But the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "If you detain me, I shall not eat your food. And if you present a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was an angel of the Lord. Now, why doesn't he know? Well, he's never there, and also, the narrator keeps telling us this is an angel. It's not a man. And this is where the editor is playing on what we know of biblical motifs, because this happens before in the story of Sarah and Abraham. Okay, hold your place here in Judges 13. Turn back to Genesis chapter 18. Genesis 18, page 30. Okay? At the very beginning, the Lord appeared to him, Abraham, by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. Throughout this story, these messengers are called only men, not angels. It's the later tradition that goes back and says angels appeared to Abraham, but the Torah itself never says that. It just refers to them as men. Okay? Here, by contrast, in the Manoah story, he says repeatedly, the storyteller says repeatedly, "It was an angel, it was an angel, it was an angel." But Manoah didn't know it was an angel. Manoah was never there. Even his wife told him, "An angel appeared to me." But he's clueless, right? Manoah is totally clueless. Now let's continue back in Judges. So he said, all these things to him, and then he goes on in verse 17. So Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? We should like to honor you when your words come true." The angel said to him, "You must not ask for my name. It is unknowable." Do we know that from anywhere? Well, yeah, but specifically, this exact thing. The angel or the divine messenger and Jacob wrestling with again, turn to Genesis 32. Hold your place in Judges, turn to Genesis 32. And turn at page 68. We're in chapter 2. And this is Jacob, starting with 25. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed, they wrestled. "Let me go forward, dawn is breaking. You will bless me." Verse 28, said the other. This is Jacob talking to him. "What is your name?" This is the man talking. "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with divine beings, or beings divine and human, and have prevailed." Jacob asked, "Pray, tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." It's the same thing. The same motif, right? An encounter with a mysterious figure. The Israelite figure asking the name, and the mysterious figure saying, "Don't ask me. I can't tell you." In Genesis 32, the guy is only called an Ish, a man. Just like in Genesis 18, it's only Ish. There is no angel. The rabbis later read angel into it, but the Torah text itself does not say angel. But in Judges, go back to Judges. In Judges, you have the same motif playing out, but we're told again and again and again that it's an angel. Okay? And Manoah he's playing the role of Jacob here, or Abraham in the other case, the Israelite figure. But whereas Jacob goes on to say in Genesis 32, he says, Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved. Jacob, even though the text only calls him a man, Jacob knows that it was some divine figure. Manoah, meanwhile, where the narrator's telling us the whole time it's an angel, Manoah is totally clueless. He doesn't know that he's encountering a divine figure. Until later on, there's Manoah in verse 19, continuing. Manoah took the kid and the meal offering and offered it to the Lord, while his wife looked on. As the flames leaped up from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flames, while Manoah and his wife looked on, and they flung themselves on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord never appeared again to Manoah and his wife. Manoah then realized that it had been an angel of the Lord. Well, welcome to the party. Because everybody else knows, right? So again, in this story, there's a lot going on here. First, about Manoah. Manoah he's like John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. He's always absent. When his wife, despite what his wife tells him and his direct encounter with the figure who we're told is an angel, he doesn't know anything. And then only very late at the end of the story, when he sees the angel actually rising up to heaven, does he know what's going on. What does Manoah mean in Hebrew? What is that related to? Doesn't sound like Manoah. I'll give you a clue.
But the Noah part sounds like Noah, wasn't
Yeah,
related?
yeah, but kind of. But we know this word in another form from Shabbat. Shabbat Menucha. What does that mean?
Restful.
Rest. Okay? In this case, I think the name is used cynically, because he's always resting. Okay, Manoah, he doesn't do anything. I heard at the CCAR conference last week, Joel Hoffman made a presentation. He's going to be our scholar in residence next year. I just booked him. He's awesome. He was talking about the story, and he said, Manoah means lazy bum. Okay? So, yeah, his name is Rest. That's the guy's name is Rest, because he's totally clueless. He's not involved in anything. Even though he has a name and his wife doesn't, she's the main figure of this story, because the angel's always appearing to her. The angel clearly doesn't even trust Manoah, because when he says, God, send the angel again, God says, okay, I'm going to send her to your wife, because he's clueless, right? So then we have the thing, again, a critique of Israelite men.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, here we have the Nazarite motif. Okay? And I think we can see now that the editor is utilizing this motif for very specific purposes. In 16, and again, we have to think of all these stories, even though they're all about Samson here. Doesn't mean that they started that way. Think about it as beads. We have the bead, the story of Samson and Delilah. Okay? And Samson, and in that story we know that he's a superhuman strong guy. And that's connected to his hair. That's all we know there. He says, it's because I'm a Nazarite. But we know that being a Nazarite has nothing to do with superhuman strength. It does have to do with having long hair. So what seems to be happening is that you have a story about a Hercules kind of figure who's superhuman, and it's tied to his hair, floating out there in the folklore. It's a bead. And the editor of Judges is utilizing this to tell a story about Samson. We have to explain, though, why does he have superhuman strength? Where does that come from? Just because he has long hair? Well, who else do we know from the Torah, from the culture, about somebody who has a long hair? Nazarite. Nazarite has long hair, but he doesn't have superhuman strength. So we got to figure out what to do with this. How to explain the superhuman strength and the connection with the hair. Well, that's where the editor seems to use this story in 13 to tell a story of Samson's origins. Now, just like in the stories in our culture about who's the big guy in our culture that has superhuman strength? The mythical figure. Superman. Samson this is a Superman story. Okay? And what do we do? And Superman, we know, is big and strong, but why is he big and strong and have superhuman strength? Well, no, kryptonite, it's like cutting the hair. But why does Superman have superhuman strength? Is he just some ordinary guy that has superhuman strength? No, he comes from another planet where they have big superpowers, and it's all about that, right? Without the story of Superman's origins, the fact of his superhuman strength doesn't make sense. It doesn't have any context. So in our culture, when the storytellers of Superman tell the story about him, they start with a birth story. That he comes from this special place and has these superhuman powers, just like Jesus. You tell a story of Jesus, they give him a birth story. His origins are miraculous. That's why he's big. 1 second. Okay, that's why everything he does later on makes sense. Chapter 13 here of Judges is giving us the birth story of Samson to explain his superhuman strength. His superhuman strength in this birth story is not due to his hair. What is it due to? No.
God.
God, right? Because he's a miraculous birth. Just like Jesus. Just like Superman. It's the reason you're strong is because of the circumstances of your birth, not because of your hair.
Is it?
Okay, hold on 1 second. I have to get the way through this and then we'll take the questions. The story about his miraculous birth comes to explain why he's so strong. Okay? So we get a story about a barren wife, which is all over the Torah. And God intervenes to cause the miraculous birth. But now the editor, this is all harmonizing. This is good editorial work. Now you have story A over here, the Samson and Delilah story about a man who's strong, and it's connected to hair. And if you cut it, he loses his strength, like if you show kryptonite to Superman. Over here, we have BB, okay? A story of a miraculous birth, right? Which we know from just generally we see how these things work, that when somebody is a miraculous birth, there's something special about it. So now we can start to connect these. Well, miraculous birth can tell me why he's strong. Here, strong is connected to hair, but it still hasn't bridged the gap. How do we bridge the gap? What's the bridge? The Nazarite motif. Okay, because here the Nazarite has long hair. So if I can make him a Nazarite, then it all works out. The problem is, it's a miraculous birth. How does Nazarite work? Nazarite is somebody takes it upon himself to make himself a Nazarite. Okay, but over here, in order to work with the birth story, the editor adapts the Nazarite motif and has his mom take on the vows on his behalf, right? This is the storyteller, or the editor, is kind of stretching the Nazarite motif in order to make the story work, right? You see how that happens? And he does it well. Because then we read here, oh, Samson was born miraculously, and he was made a Nazarite from the time he was in his womb. So now by the time I read the story of Samson and Delilah and all the other stories about his superhuman strength, it makes sense. Because he was born miraculously, and he has long hair, and that somehow relates to his strength, even though we know that long hair has nothing to do with strength in the Nazarite motif. Okay, so it looks like the editor has these beads and strings them together using these various tactics so that we read Samson as a superhero, who is chosen by God for something. When if you just read the story in 16, Samson and Delilah, Samson is just like this brute fool, right? Who is like suckered by women and keeps, going back to her. And what have you, that's it. But this is the making of a superhero. Okay? All right, Paula, you have a question?
I think I read somewhere that the creators of Superman were Jewish.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm wondering, could have been a connection between Superman and Samson's story?
Okay, did they say so? Okay.
Yeah,
So he's like the Superman, but this kind of figure is present in other cultures. Of course, the Greeks had Hercules. And of course, Hercules is the product of a miraculous kind of birth too, right? The union of one of the gods and human. Okay, so that's why he's superhuman. There's Tarzan in whatever, I guess Western culture, I don't know, Tarzan. He's super strong too. So this kind of figure exists in lots of different cultures, right? But just doing this peeling back work, you can kind of trace it and see how motifs and imagery that are known from the culture by drawing on the Nazarite, drawing on the encounter with the divine figure. All of this comes together to generate a character. To take a Samson who may have just been in the core story, just some kind of strong, brute Tarzan figure, and is made into an anointed one of God. Okay? And all the while, you have the ongoing critique of Israelite leadership in this time period, specifically Israelite men. Right? Samson is a fool, a brutish kind of fool, and Manoah is just out to lunch, right? I mean, and it's his wife who's playing the active role, just like Deborah. Deborah was, in there. So, and Yael. Okay, so you can see now that the editor of this book is putting forth a number of agendas, religiously, politically, etc., to make the case that we need a king, because we can't count on these clowns to govern us well. And salvation is always coming, is coming in the hands of either of buffoons in Israel or foreigners. And by the way, their downfall too. Samson's downfall comes from Delilah, who's a foreigner. Right? So we need a stronger leader, a king, who provides continuous, strong leadership. That's, I think, the message of Judges. Yeah.
Getting back to Yael, I noticed that she's supposed to be in time with Moses as a child, a progeny of the
Moses' father.
Now later on, earlier on Numbers, it's mentioned about Hobab, that he's a Midianite,
Right.
Moses' father-in-law.
Father.
So is there any other time that they're mentioned besides these two times?
Yeah, well, Moses' father-in-law is in a lot of places in the book. He's called sometimes Jethro,
Yitro.
sometimes Yitro, sometimes Hobab. He's got.
What's his background? Is he supposed to be?
He's a Midianite priest. He's not Israelite.
Did he
Moses marries his daughter. Okay, so
Did he convert at one point?
no,
No.
there is no conversion in the Torah. He becomes a friend of the Jewish people, of the Israelites, and so forth. But he doesn't.
And all his progeny ends up being also friends of Israelites.
Well, it seems like it in Judges, because they have this alliance. Okay, all right, so good. Judges is fun.
Okay, thank you.
It's a weird book, isn't it?